Hello, I'm Andy Tepper, co-chair of the Brooklyn Book Festival's International Committee, and I'm extremely pleased to welcome you to the 2022 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival day for a conversation with Mohsin Hamid, Monique Roffey, and Ayanna Lloyd Banwo. Before we begin, I want to let you know that books by the authors in this program can be purchased in the link below. Okay, quick introduction bios of the three authors. Mohsin Hamid is the author of 5 novels, including the Booker Prize finalists and New York Times bestsellers, Exit West and The Reluctant Fundamentalist. He divides his time between Lahore, New York, and London. His new novel, The Last White Man, came out this August. Monique Roffey is the author of 7 books, 4 of which are set in Trinidad and the Caribbean region. The Mermaid of Black Conch won the 2020 Costa Book of the Year Award. She was born in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and educated in the UK. And Ayanna Lloyd Banwo is a writer from Trinidad and Tobago. She is a graduate of the creative writing program at the University of East Anglia and is now a postgraduate researcher in creative critical writing there. When We Were Birds is her first novel. Welcome all 3 of you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And tell us where you all are and what time it is there and what's happening.
It's 5. I'm in London. It's 5 o'clock. I'm resisting turning my heat on, but I'm freezing, so I'm in jumpers upon jumpers right now.
And Monique, you're also in London?
Same. I'm in London on probably the different part. I'm in the East End of London, and I'm in the same situation as Ayanna, desperately trying to hold off turning the heating on. Having said that, it has gone on once or twice, but God knows how long I'm going to hang on to this.
Okay.
Try our best. Get some like those under thermal things.
And Mohsin, it's evening where you are, right?
Yeah, I'm in Lahore, Pakistan. It's 9 o'clock in the evening. The weather's actually pretty good, except for the torrential rains, which have been hitting the country. But where I am, there's a gentle air conditioner whirring in the background. The electricity tends to go a couple of times a day, so it might conk out at some point during this call. So if the sudden changes, that's what happened.
And you were saying that the heavy floods in Pakistan were in the south and haven't directly impacted you yet, but are affecting the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the scale is sort of hard to believe. It's 30 million people, so it's the entire population of New York State basically that's been displaced. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to begin our conversation today with the idea of transformations, big and small, the obvious and perhaps the more subtle. What do they mean and how are these central to these novels? But from there, I'm hoping we can branch out and open the conversation and see how your books talk to each other in different ways. And we're planning to also include short readings if we have the time and end by taking questions from the audience on chat. But let's jump into it. Mohsin, first, I wanted to ask you, The Last White Man opens with a pretty dramatic transformation. Anders, a young white man, wakes up brown. Now tell us the idea of this transformation, how it occurred to you, and what Anders' immediate reactions are.
So I think the idea, I guess, is rooted in the notion that race is this thing that we kind of imagine into existence, right? That we look different one from the other, but race is something that is an imaginary construct. 2,000 years ago, if you were in ancient Rome or Greece, they wouldn't have thought of race the same way. If you leave, Ghana for America, you'll suddenly discover that race is something very different. Same in Pakistan to the UK. And so Anders suddenly experiences, in a way, the imaginary nature of race when he wakes up dark, and he thinks of himself as somebody who's white. And I guess to a certain extent, the idea for it dates back about 20 years to 9/11 and its aftermath, the terrorist attacks of 2001, when a lot of us who have, brown skin and sort of Muslim names suddenly found, in a way, our racial identity transformed overnight. And one went from, being whatever one was before in a country like the US or the UK to suddenly being thought of, with enormous suspicion. And it was interesting because, you haven't changed, I haven't changed, but yet what's being written upon me has changed incredibly. And so Andrew's experience is something a bit like that.
Yeah, and as this mysterious contagion spreads across the town, we don't know where we are exactly. Others begin to change complexion and race, but experience it in different ways. Tell me about how his girlfriend Una views it in a very different way, has a very different reaction. In fact, feels a welcome, as if it were a welcome escape.
Well, Una is dealing with, she's grappling with a bunch of different things. Her brother has recently died. Her father died when she was younger. Her mother is in the grips of a real fear that white people, in a sense, are being erased before people begin changing color, and is profoundly depressed and anxious. And Una is sort of trying to hold on to, her own grip really on her life and what's going on around her. And she feels enormously trapped and constrained. And so as these changes begin to unfold, she's nervous about them, but she also begins to feel a certain sense of, well, she might be ready for what's next. She might be willing to have things change. She doesn't really like how things are at the moment.
Yeah, and Monique, the Mermaid of Black Conch, of course, revolves around an obvious transformation as well, or a double one, or even a triple one. Centuries ago, an Indigenous Caribbean woman is transformed by a spell into a mermaid. She'll then be brought on shore and gradually become human again, learn to walk, to talk, to fall in love. How is the love affair that develops between her and David, the fisherman who saves her, crucial to her transformation? And how does it change them both?
Oh, well, it's yeah, I guess somewhere in it there's a story about the transformation of love, the transformational power of love. God, I've got so much to say. I always get completely dumbstruck. Well,
yeah, tell us about the transformation.
About denying a woman a rite of passage, denying her an erotic rite of passage. It's stopping her from growing past the kind of maid virgin. It's denying her sexuality, her the potential to have a lover, and they toss her into the sea. She's pesky. There's so much to say about this old story. I'm just about to interview Natalie Haynes, who has rewritten Medusa. So old stories are way pre-feminism, and we're kind of in some way inked. We have this in our DNA, these very old stories with very ideas, especially about women. Maid, mother, crone, whore, and it's always the woman in these old stories that have to be taught a lesson, and they carry the buck, and so I've liberated my mermaid. I've given her the rite of passage, and I've allowed her to step into agency and be subjective, and not know the rules, and step forward into something she has no idea what she's doing, but she's coming at it anyway, and her walking into her first night of love. But it's David who writes back to say, I've had lots of women since, and I had lots of women before, but she really taught me something about myself, which was, I guess something around not the usual chase, coming out of a binary situation into something he can't get, he can't have, he can't conquer her, all the rules don't work, he has to wait, he has to be picked, he has to suspend himself. So it's a game changer for David, and it's a game changer for everybody who comes in contact with a mermaid. She is truly magical. She truly doesn't really even know the power of her magic. She's just trying to get by from day to day. And, I could talk a lot about my mermaid. I'm going to stop there.
But you very definitely wanted to recast this trope of the mermaid
Yeah,
in a different lens.
obviously,
Yeah,
because mermaids are young,
yeah,
half naked. You never see an old mermaid or a mermaid with a cardigan on or hat, or like a middle-aged mermaid or a granny mermaid, you know, or black mermaids. You know, they're just so stereotyped. They've been hijacked by a Victorian consciousness and awareness and ambiguous sexuality. And I was like, to ask for that, you know, we're going to rethink this, because no, you know, these, and then she's been totally ruined by Disney, and, you know, completely ruined by Disney. So there's something for me there about, like, well, if most people in the world are brown or black, then most mermaids are brown or black, right? You know, that's straightforward. Let's go back. It's mermaids are pre-Christian. They're thousands and thousands of years old. We've been dreaming them up. You must stop me. Just make a sign. Otherwise, I'll just rant.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Make a sign, do something like that. So they come from before we were Christianized. They come from our pagan consciousness. They come from when we were respectful and in sync with nature. And they're literally a fusion of the sea, the ocean, and woman. Boom. Such a strong, iconic product of our collective unconscious. Let's stop there.
Okay, we'll get back to it, but Ayanna, I want to ask you about When We Were Birds, and also about the women, very specifically about the women in the book. The book begins with this legend of certain birds in ancient times who carried the secret of the spirit world with them, and then before they're transformed into humans. Later, these powers are passed down among the generations of women specifically. So tell me about the special connections to the dead that haunt the main character, Yejide, and the women in her family in various ways, and how she struggles with the burden of this gift.
Thank you. The birds in particular that I used to, I don't want to say create this myth, because I don't know if we really create anything, where, you know, the products of bits of stories that we've read, bits of mythology that we've picked up. And then, of course, you know, we try to, you know, work that into whatever story we're trying to create. So for me, the corbeau, or the South American vulture, was a fascinating creature, and always has been. You see them a lot in Trinidad. You know, anytime something is dead, carcass, dead dog, or somebody dropped out, you know, stuff from restaurant garbage, you see them sort of circle and circle. So they're seen as sort of almost harbingers of death, or associated with death and darkness and so. But these are animals who, in their very biology, are responsible for sanitation, cleanliness, for, I guess, balancing our ability to live safely and so on. So I found they were really fascinating. I've always found they were quite fascinating birds. And the more you kind of dig up, when you dig up into the corbeau, you realize how many myths and stories and legends have been associated with them over the years. And I was particularly interested in the one that I read about Oshun of the Yoruba people. And, you know, there's a particular story, which is a long thing to go into, but she actually sort of transforms into this black vulture from her beautiful woman self in sacrifice to save the world. And, you know, between that, all the other things, there's this idea of, you know, women as sacrificial creatures, of the burden of the female and the mother to, you know, make everything okay, you know, save everyone, save the world kind of thing. And the fact that she has to abandon her beauty and her youth and so on to do it. So there's this very powerful symbol of the vulture, the corbeau, as we call it in Trinidad, that has to do with sacrifice and has to do with abandoning this kind of one-dimensional idea of the beautiful woman, the young woman, in order to do something larger and bigger and more important. And so in the story, in my creation story that I've started this book with, these birds come into being, these corbeaux, because they have saved the world from a great ancient war. And over the years, they evolve and evolve, and they turn into women. but the women have the same role. The woman's role is to usher the dead into the afterlife. They maintain the balance. They maintain the spiritual and physical balance in the world. But like the nature of sacrifice, they are invisible. So I suppose that is what these women have to deal with, the fact that they have this awesome responsibility, this huge power, but their entire lives in service of something that is greater than them, that they will never get thanks for, that no one will ever know that they're doing at all. But it is completely necessary. So that's a combination of this huge task, but also a kind of a silencing that is necessary for their work to take place. And Yejide is the latest heir of this power in the city she lives in, Port Angeles, which is my imagined version of Port of Spain in Trinidad. And she struggles with that sacrifice and struggles with that invisibility and struggles with having to live a life that is all about, you know, doing something for someone else.
Yeah, you mentioned it's your vision of an imagined Trinidad or imagined Port of Spain. So I'm curious, Mohsin, your setting, as I mentioned, is unspecified and vague, and I wonder if you could talk about why you intentionally did that. And Monique and Ayanna, tell me more about your version of Trinidad. What was inspired by a real place and what you wanted to invent?
So, you know, for me, I think that one of the really interesting things about written word-based, you know, is that it's quite different from the other mass-produced storytelling forms, you know, television and cinema. Because in those forms, you see a world that looks like the world, and you are a viewer of that. And when you read a book, you look at something that is nothing like the world. It's letters and spaces and punctuation marks on a white field. And the reader creates characters and images and feelings and physical sensations out of this thing. And so I think, you know, what we write for me is, you know, it's not that we don't really write novels. We sort of write these half novels. And then readers imagine these half novels into what they actually experience as a novel. And part of, for me, what's interesting about playing with specificity, of having a place be maybe not this place or not fully named, not fully described, is it allows the reader to imagine onto that place what the reader chooses to imagine. And so for me, I'm very attracted to this idea of, in a way, leaving a degree of non-specificity that the reader gets to fill in. And the reader might think it's come from me. Somebody will say, oh, why did you choose to set this book in Britain or America or, you know, South Africa? And I'll say, I actually didn't choose to do that. You chose to do that. And I think for me, that's one of the things I find very attractive about this playing with specific place or specificity in writing.
Mm. And Monique and Ayanna, tell me about what you based on Trinidad and what you invented or imagined.
I think I really like what you said, that, you know, it's a cooperation between writer and reader, where, you know, there's this co-creation of place. And I think I started trying to write Port of Spain straight on, and I found that Port of Spain was both, one, I was terrified that I'd get things wrong. I think that is a fear that maybe anybody who lives away from home and writing home, you have that fear of, gosh, have I been away too long? The street that was once a one-way street is now a two-way street. The building that I'm tracking is not there anymore. And I think I had a lot of anxieties at first about getting this place wrong. And I mean, Monique, you know, Trinis, you get somewhere wrong, they go pelt you with ripe mango. They go say, you see, look, she gone away. And she so there was that anxiety.
You did an incredible job. You did an incredible job. But I have more to say about that when it's my turn.
Well, that so there was that, but there was also that, you know, I needed a bigger canvas than an island. Right. But I also wanted to write Port of Spain like if it was a bigger canvas. I wanted it to be large. I wanted Darwin to be able to go from the south of the island to the north and feel like if he was taking this epic long journey. I wanted that highway drive to seem like if he started it in dusk and he could reach there hours and hours later, when it might really only be 40 minutes if you have no traffic. So, and I wanted it to be a place that people could get, that it would be logical that you could be lost in, that you could go to the big city and something can happen to you, disappear, and no one would find you again. So I needed to play with the place, but I also wanted, maybe not wanted, but I'm happy that it is so recognizable as Port of Spain as well.
Go ahead, Monique, what were you going to say?
It's interesting because you see this place called Trinidad. I mean, we punch above our weight when it comes to producing writers. I mean, you can't move for writers coming out of Trinidad now. It is like, we're in the middle of an explosion. And I was on stage not long ago with Ayanna and Ingrid. And it's fascinating because we've written these novels, they're completely different, but yet they're very connected. And so where we come from is so wildly original and polyglot and you know, like and we're all, I mean, I've talked to so many diasporic Trinidadians. I will get to my point in a minute. And we're like, when are we gonna ever get over Trinidad? You know, when are we gonna stop writing about Trinidad? And this is like friends of mine who are my age. I'm older than Ayanna, and we've been writing, we can't stop writing about Trinidad, and I must stop writing about Trinidad. So it's this incredibly charismatic place that's.
Does anybody ask when are you going to stop writing about Britain, or when are you going to stop writing about America? What kind of question? Sorry.
Yeah, but I sometimes think, look, God, now there's so many of us writing, like back down, you know, like step back now, you know, just like go away. But then it's like, well, I've just got one more. Like, so somebody was murdered in my parents' house last summer, and it hit the papers. And I'm like, I'm a writer, how do I ignore that? How do I not write that? That's happened in my father's house that he built where he died. The house was already haunted. And now another man gets murdered in this house. I'm not going to write that book. I'm stuck with it. So anyway, what was the question? Black Conch is not a city, just quickly. I'm a very metropolitan person. I live in a city in London. And when I go to Trinidad, I'm very close. I'm just outside Port of Spain, and my life in both cities is not too dissimilar. So I know arty, filmy, writerly people in both countries. You know, it's kind of like for like, sort of, but not. But Black Conch is set in the coastal town areas, and over many, many years of visiting certain parts of northern Trinidad and Tobago, I have conflated two places to make somewhere fictional that I can work with.
Monique, thank you. Just to go back to what you were saying about these explosion of Trinidadian writers, I read your essay in The Guardian, and you specifically point to the women writers right now. You said there's this gender quake of writers, and kind of an answer, of course, to Naipaul and the misogyny of the male writers of the generation before. So yeah,
I am, you know, just pointing it out really. But there are male writers in Trinidad emerging now, but they're like 3 to 10. You know, it's like it is a time of women coming forward, and so you know, there's just so many different types of women. The diversity is coming through as well. So, you know, Indo-Caribbean writers, Afro-Caribbean writers, a Buddhist European writer like me, or, you know, all kinds of people are contributing. And I also think there is something generational. We have a big festival happening in Trinidad. Been happening for about 12 years.
Right, Bocas.
Something about this boom is connected to Bocas being there for us all. And I would also say just access to the internet has made a big difference as well. Anybody can upload there, anyone can blog, anyone can write, anyone can enter the national writing competition here, there, and everywhere. People are so much more connected than they ever were. Again, this is a huge subject. There's been lots of feminist work on the fact that women have always written in the Caribbean, but a lot of them never made it to London. They never made it to the famous green room at Langham's. They never made it. They were having families. It was the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. You know, women weren't leaving the islands and going to London.
Someone asked me that once about, you know, women writers and whatever. I'm like, we've been here. Where have you been? Was sort of my response, you know.
Yeah. Mohsin, just to jump in, I wanted to ask you about that opening line I referred to, which has this echo of Kafka and the Metamorphosis, of course. But tell me about that echo, and then were there other books, especially about racial transformations, that were touchstones for you in any way with this book?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd like to just jump in on what Ayanna was saying, and to a certain degree what Monique was saying. You know, this idea of writing from a place. You know, there is a fear, of course, of representation that I think many writers have, is that, you know, is one sort of unfairly or unthinkingly taking on a kind of representational mantle when each of us has only really a tiny slice of the picture that we have access to. And so you do different things as a writer, I think, to disarm or to interrogate that you know, impulse. But the other part of it is, I think, you know, and it connects, I think, also to writing, you know, by and about women, is, you know, how do you reach for the universal? And in other words, how does one, if the expectation is, in a sense, a kind of exoticization, that there's a certain domain in which a particular place or a particular type of character is meant to sit, how does one sort of expand and play with that? And among the ways that one can do that, of course, is to play with the place and to say that, you know, Lahore is actually the universal city. I'm going to talk about Lahore, but actually I'm talking about your city too, because Lahore is a lot like your city, or it's more like your city than New York and London are. And people use New York and London as a universal city all the time, or to blur in these things. And so anyway, I think, you know, to connect that to the sort of opening sentence and this Kafka thing, I think what's interesting, you know, in a way, a lot of responses to this novel have sort of grounded it in the tradition of Kafka. And I think, you know, the opening paragraph, the opening sentence is a nod to Kafka, etc. But the idea of somebody waking up different, you know, wasn't invented in sort of, you know, Middle Europe 80 years ago. I mean, you know, you go back to Egyptian texts of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and people are waking up transformed. You know, the Arabian Nights is full of this stuff, and everybody's folk literature is full of this stuff. So I think it's maybe a mistake to imagine, in a sense, that this kind of transformational literature is rooted in Kafka, even if Kafka is kind of an important reference point. And the last thing I'll say on this is, in terms of, like, you know, what are your sources and what are your kind of inspirations? I mean, there's too many to really list, but I remember one book that had a huge impact on me as a student in secondary school in Pakistan, was when we were assigned Chinua Achebe's No Longer at Ease in high school. And that was very interesting for me, because it was a young man, he, you know, leaves Nigeria, goes off to study abroad, comes back, and then he is, as the title says, sort of no longer at ease. And this transformation of him, he's come back home. And I think many of us who pursued lives that have been, that calling it diasporic isn't quite right, you know, that it's been sort of, you know, multisporic, like you're abroad some of the time, then you're back, you know, you're sort of both of here and there, you're moving around. I think that sense of how we're constantly transforming, and we often look in the mirror and find ourselves transformed, or see somebody looking at us and see ourselves transformed in their gaze, is something I've experienced throughout my life, you know, bouncing from and to Lahore from other places. But yeah, I would put that book, read at the age of 17, as a pretty seminal text in terms of a human being being transformed.
Oh, that's interesting. Ayanna, I wanted to ask you about a more subtle transformation of David, Yojide's lover in your novel. They meet on the grounds of the cemetery, and he's a Rastafarian, so he's had to undergo some sort of personal transformation to even arrive there, because he is meant to avoid the dead and the dying in every way possible.
Yes. So Darwin as a character actually was the character that came first. I had this scene in my head of a man walking through the cemetery, looking around to make sure no one was left behind before he locked up at the end of the day. And, you know, the more I sort of lived with the character, I started thinking about, you know, is he comfortable? Is he not comfortable? And I guess, you know, it's the idea of somebody who, after a very long period of time of doing this work, has found himself feeling more comfortable in a city of the dead than anywhere else. And, you know, how did he sort of get to that point? So in writing the novel, I said, okay, I have to go back and see, okay, where did he start from? And I've always been, I think the Rastafari, not just as a religion or a political movement or whatever, but I suppose as a Caribbean trope in literature and language and music and so on, that image, that symbol of the righteous man, the man who is in the world but not of the world, the man. And of course I'm saying man and deliberately saying man because there's also that very patriarchal quality to this idea of, you know, what this means to be a man constructed in this way. And so Darwin has to make this choice, you know, does he, you know, continue to take care of his mother? Does he stay in one place with no financial prospects, or does he move to the city and find some kind of employment anywhere? Does he take up the job that is, that essentially makes him ritually unclean every day? So it's a huge, that scene where I've had letters and emails from people who say that scene when Darwin cuts his locks off, you know, the trauma of that scene, and he really has to become a different person. And it's not as simple as saying, okay, I'm going to put my religion in my back pocket. It's everything about him has to transform to be able to do this work. And I think it is, I think part of what I found important about him as a character and placing him in this place. One, it's always interesting to back a character up against the wall. It's always interesting to get them to do the very thing that they said that they would never do, the very place they said they would never go. You know, what comes out, what kind of qualities does this person have that they didn't even know they had? But it's also about me, I think, trying to navigate and find a sense of how I see death and dying, about the various ways I guess African diaspora peoples have created deathways and death traditions to keep links with ancestry, also to put some to the side. Also, you know, I find deathways are very, very interesting ways of looking at who people say they are and what they choose to keep, retain, that kind of thing. So I was very interested in that. And I was also very interested in creating this cemetery fidelis that felt like a double city. You know, Mohsin, you were talking about this idea of the stereotypical stories that you expect to come out of maybe small places, maybe brown places, maybe, you know what I mean? And I think it was important to me to think about what is a city. You know, we don't think of our places as having cities. We think of our places as having wildernesses, you know, uncontrollable places where, you know, no one's cosmopolitan, no one's making art, no one's making, you know, that kind of thing. So I think exploring these two layers of Port Angeles, Port of Spain was interesting for me to think about.
Please jump in if you want to respond to the idea of death and dying or other or anything else. I wanted to also ask Monique and Mohsin particularly about the transformations that you describe, the physical transformations you describe in realistic ways, even as we know they're incredibly fantastical. So tell me about how you balanced what realistic details you wanted with the fantastical.
Well, I didn't really so quite a few people have said to me, that the first paragraph as well was where so many people felt that they could settle with the book, because I wasn't going to oh, by the way, you know, later on in the book, or in some way be ambiguous about it, or too magical, or reveal that it's not, you know. I just knew that I was going to present this by a reliable, omniscient narrator, and I think I knew that by fragmenting the narrative up, I think this is true of like stories in true life. Somebody tells you a story that's a fantastic story, and you know it's great to hear it. But what if like 2 or 3 people are telling you about the same thing as Mermaid, like from 1976? Then it becomes more credible. So we have 2 or 3 narrators, including the Mermaid, trying to sort of tell this story that actually happened. This is time before the internet. There's no proof. Everybody was drunk. Nobody took a photograph of the Mermaid. It just happened. And again, I lean heavily into a reliable narrator to pull this off. And epistolary form, David is a reliable narrator. I'm not being too tricky or tricksy. I'm not trying to pass it off as anything but the truth. This thing happened. And again, you know, Ayanna knows only too well that there's this strong storytelling tradition in the Caribbean, and talent for telling stories. And I've always been incredibly susceptible myself to oral storytelling and to filmic storytelling. I am easily hypnotized, like, you know, a good Trini, you know, people talking late at night, telling stories, and I'm hypnotized. So I think it's a trick that all writers know. They know this is what we're doing. We're hypnotizing the reader, and we have tricks of the trade, you know, point of view being one of them. So you present something as everyday, that this fantastical thing, I'm not even passing this off as fantasy. This happened.
Right, you're describing every step of the way, you know, her scales dropping off, you know, legs appearing. It's a very graphic physical description.
Yeah, that's it. I just went for the straight telling. This is what happened.
Yeah, I think that that idea of introducing, you know, what you might call the fantastical, but in a sense as the commonplace, or as just how it is, you know, to me is very powerful, because that's how it happens in our life. You know, there you are, and you hear that somebody close to you has just been in a horrific accident, or that something has happened, and you know, suddenly you're in this entirely fantastical situation.
Yeah,
it just happens. And so I think that human life actually is full of these impossible, fantastical elements. You know, the pandemic that came around. Suddenly in Pakistan, there were no flights for months. I mean, nobody could go anywhere. And you know, the restaurants were closed, and the schools were closed, and you know, what is that if not an entirely fantastical thing? And it, you know,
entirely insane.
Yeah, completely insane. And so I think in a sense, what these ruptures, what you might call sort of fantastical ruptures, do is they restore a relationship to the kind of anarchic reality which is a human life, that often less fantastical storytelling that says, okay, this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, pretends is not the case. And we go through much of our lives expecting stories to be, in a way, believable, and to sort of follow what is the believable path. The problem is that our lives aren't like that. And that, right now, there's 30 million people displaced by this, biblical flood in Pakistan. Like, what is that if not fantastical?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that so, the UK, the pandemic is over. The memo has been sent, it's done, it's finished, right? Then every now and again, somebody from home comes to visit. And because in Trinidad, there's still a little bit more mask wearing, a little bit more, they kind of come and they're like, what absolute uncivilized, mad place are you living in? Where you're just, so there's the whole, this is the real place, right? England is the real place where they have things together and they have vaccines and they know whatever. And then suddenly you come from somewhere that's supposed to be not the real place, that is a little bit more measured about, coming back into the new normal. And you get on a plane and then you come out and they're like parades in the streets and people, you're like, what insanity? I mean, just that shift alone, there's something so fantastical and almost like this can't be real. You just got in a big tin can in the sky and you came out and you walked into a world where nothing seems like it's making sense at all. And that's just our reality.
And this can't be real. I mean, what we're doing right now, it's inconceivable. You would have taken the most, incredibly powerful master of witchcraft and sorcery to have wielded and experienced anything like this more than a generation ago, right? I mean, what we're doing right now, we're sort of, oh, this is just, the Zoom call or whatever. But this is pretty profound magic that's happening right now.
Yeah, this is similar to Exit West. I mean, stepping through a portal, right?
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, in that book, that it was just this idea, which is our world today, where we can step through these portals or speak through these portals and move our bodies through these tin cans in the sky. As Ayanna said, that is something, and oftentimes we I think benefit from being reminded by just how strange and weird and fantastical stuff that we're pretending is normal actually is.
Yeah. I just want to say we have about 10 minutes left. If people want to send a question, and we'll try to get to it, and maybe even squeeze in short readings. I have just one final question to all of you, and it's much more general. And I'm interested in how you approach these novels and where they fall in the trajectory of your work and your writing. Ayanna, for you, it was a debut novel, so I'm interested in if this material was. You were working on it for a while, and I mean was germinating. And Mohsin and Monique, I'm curious how these novels, do they fit with your recent works, or were they departures in some ways?
Yeah, it's interesting when I've now written a lot of books. I don't know how it all happened. So I've just delivered my 8th book, and I've got 2 or 3 more, but never, they're under the bed or in a drawer or something. And I do want to stop, I keep saying it, and try a different form, or maybe just stop for a while. But when I look back, when you rack a few up, you can look back and there's loads of stuff going on in all my books that are very, very common, lots of magical realism, lots of skeletal stories, which are ancient stories, lots of pets. I put pets in all my books, lots of dogs and cats, lots of love, lots of sex, lots of sexuality. And sometimes, I've written 2 sex books. I'm like, how did I do that? Lots of Trinidad, lots of Caribbean.
I guess I'm also asking.
White people. I'm not interested in other white people. I'm just interested in Caribbean white people, and how and why white Trinidad. What are they doing in Trinidad, in the Caribbean? And stand up for yourself. And what on earth are you doing here?
That's a fascinating character in your novel. Arcadia Rain.
Arcadia, well, there's more coming.
Yeah.
All crazy white people. But so yeah, and I guess writing against type, I'm very interested in archetypes because they're so, we're all working with archetypes, and writing against type, just a lot of, and I think, once you start writing a lot, it's a good idea to stop because I don't want to start writing, I think Martin Amis said something about, a critic, he read a critic saying, Martin Amis's books are all the same kind of thing. And he had no idea. And, no one ever wants to be that. No one ever wants to end up like you've written a lot of books that look quite similar. I'm not sure if people tell me that's not the case with me, but I can see that there's all sorts of stuff going on in my books.
Yeah, I guess to tie back to the theme today, I'm interested in how you all have been transformed as writers, in a sense.
I guess I'll have the shortest answer. I find it difficult to even speak about a trajectory. It's like I write one book, I don't know.
Yeah,
The next one might be a totally different thing. 5 years from now, 10 years from now might be a completely different kind of writer. I mean, certainly my life has been continuously transformed from 2013, I suppose, to now. I lost 2 parents. I gave up a life. I cashed in a life insurance policy. I moved countries. I left all my shit in one place, moved somewhere else. I somehow got married. I mean, there's nothing that has made sense about anything that has happened to me in the last few years. And somehow I managed to do this thing that I always wanted to do, that I was never sure whether I could actually do it. At some point, you just throw it in and say, you know what, I'm going to write this book. And hopefully I'm able to continue doing that, but I have no sense of trajectory, of pattern, of this is the kind of writer I am, because I hope I could reserve the right to be the kind of writer that each book requires me to be. You know what I mean? So yeah.
I agree completely. I think trying to be the kind of writer that each book requires is what sort of keeps it interesting, at least for me. That good
to know that, because you would know.
I know. I mean, I've been doing, I guess, a book or two a decade. For the last, I began my first book 30 years ago, and I think that each time it's you finished a book, and now you're in that space where the next book is going to be conceived, and you sort of are making this womb of empty time in your day, that every day is left and some life comes into it somehow. And I think that for me it's what can I really sort of fall in love with? Like, what is it that is going to make keeping so much of my life into this separate space all alone worthwhile? And that's sort of, I guess, how I think about it. But very much I think both what Ayanna and Monique have said, I feel resonates with me.
But do you feel this book is closely connected to Exit West, what you were doing with?
Yeah, I mean, so Trajectory in retrospect wrote a novel about Lahore and drugs and sex and young people, urban life, different from a lot of other books that I'd read about South Asia at that point. Wrote a book about this Muslim man being this American guy, dramatic monologue, very different form, very different way of writing. Then moved back to Pakistan and thought I wanted to de-exoticize myself, wrote a book that intentionally doesn't use the word Pakistan or the word Islam and forces me to describe everything for myself and not rely on brand names. Then thought maybe that was in a way too cerebral or too closed of a form, and thought, let me write a book that has a decoder ring built into it so that anybody can just pick up the ring and read the book. And then, from that flowed into a book that tries to do this very weird sort of transgressive thing of characters who are not, in theory, me or like me, but borrow some of the sentence approaches and other things and lack of specificity. So there's these strands that carry through for sure.
Yeah, I want to thank all three of you. I think we've run out of time. I guess we won't do a reading, but I really want to thank all three of you for a wonderful conversation. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
And I hope some of you guys put the Lahore one of these days as well.
Yeah.
And I hope to see all of you in Brooklyn one of these days as well. Of course, next Sunday is the actual in-person festival day. Reminder to everyone. And reminder to buy the books and please donate to the Brooklyn Book Festival if possible, which is celebrating its 17th year of free literary programming. Thank you, Ayanna. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Mohsin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.